Hi everyone, Anne Tofte here, behavior specialist. I want to talk to you about this example of the behavior intervention plan. So in the beginning of the document, we have some self-explanatory things: student name, birth date, IEP date, and date of BIP. The date of BIP is generally the date of the IEP meeting where you present it to the team. These checkboxes here, the behavior intervention plan is based on the following. It could be based on a FBA. If an FBA was conducted, the 60-day assessment that we do for some severe cases. So if an FBA happened and this BIP is a result of that, then you check that box. However, most frequently we're checking the second box. It wasn't based on an FBA, it was based on data collection. So that's the one you're most often going to check, but like it says, check all that apply. The problem behavior impeding learning. So here you're going to label and describe the behavior that is impeding the student's access to FAPE. Remember to use objective and specific language. And the test there is, if somebody didn't know the student and they picked up this plan and they read your description of the behavior, would they have a pretty good idea of what the behavior looks like? So avoiding things like she gets angry, because who knows what that looked like? That could look like so many things. Or she's non-compliant. You can use words like non-compliant, but you just have to give a description of them if you use them. So our example here, Sarah engages in aggression, includes, and then we describe it. Because again, aggression is too vague, it could look like anything. For the frequency, intensity, and duration, not every behavior lends themselves to all of these categories. So some behaviors, you might include a frequency, but not a duration, or not an intensity. For example, if you're talking about on task versus off task, you probably wouldn't call that an intensity. You can't really intensely be on task or intensely be off task. You would be looking then at duration, probably. Like how much of the class time is the student on task? How much of the class time is the student off task? So it depends on the behavior. In this case, though, we have aggression, which you can measure with frequency. How many times, was a fist thrown? How many, in a punch? How many times did she kick? How many times did she hit you with something? So that is able to be captured that way. Also intensity. For aggression, you can talk about intensity. It sometimes comes down to, did it leave a mark? Did it hurt the person? Did the person require medical intervention? So we could say aggression is mild intensity if, a child swipes at somebody but it doesn't leave a mark. That's still aggression, but it's mild intensity. As opposed to what we have in this example, where this student is hurting the peer. So that would be severe. Duration, it doesn't have to be the duration of the actual incident. It can be a duration of an episode. So if a child hits and kicks and swings and lashes out and screams for a long time, they're not asking, but how long was the punch? Because it was less than a second probably, right? Like each instance of aggression, we don't need to know the duration of that, but we might need to know the duration of an episode. If lots of aggressive behaviors are grouped together, we might call that an episode and say how long it lasts. So how long until the student calms down from when it starts. Under reported by and observed by, this might be the same list of people. Who's reporting it? Who is telling the writer of the BIP all the above stuff? So how does whoever's writing the BIP, how do they know what the behavior looks like, how often it occurs, who's it reported by, and also who is it observed by? Prevention, part 1, environmental factors. So the first section here, asking what are the antecedents? It's just asking you what happens before the behavior. And we're hoping here that a pattern emerges. So maybe it happens during structured time, but not during free time, or the opposite. Or maybe it happens in small group, but not whole group. So whatever it is, whatever antecedents you've noticed, think about, this is a neat thought exercise. If you wanted to make this person do this behavior, which of course we never ever would, what could you do? Is there any way you could make this student do this behavior? And a lot of times when I phrase it that way, people say, oh yeah, probably if I put math in front of him and sat him next to his least favorite peer and didn't give him any breaks, then yeah, I could make him hit me. So of course, don't do that. But that's helpful for when we're looking at antecedents. Okay, so during certain activities, and next to certain peers, and not allowing breaks, like working a long time between breaks. Maybe all of those could be antecedents that you list. So any pattern that you've noticed. Could be certain people, certain routines, all these examples. So our example here is, well, in this fake behavior plan, the student had engaged in aggression 2 times. So I just listed both of those times, what happened before it. Well, we were in academic work time, it was a large group instruction, and a particular peer was nearby. But there could be a ton more information you can list under antecedents. Other common ones are like, if there's a sub, we're more likely to have behaviors that day. Or if they're denied access to a preferred activity, like maybe they really wanted to go to an assembly, but then one of the DIS providers came to pull them for service or something, and we saw the behavior on that day. Any change in routine could be an antecedent. So anything like that. All of that is good. Let's see, where are we now? And the example I gave here, you can say it as a sentence or you can say it as a bulleted list, as long as the information is there. I like bulleted lists, but some people prefer to write out a story, which is fine too. What environmental structures and supports are needed to reduce the behavior? Aha, so here, look at what you put in antecedents, the section above. And then this is asking, okay, so if those are the antecedents that might be triggering the behavior, how could we make those antecedents less frequent or less likely? Or what are we going to do for the student so that, that's the triggering behavior is not so abundant? So since our example was, well, her antecedents, we can't say for sure they're triggers, but her antecedents were during work time, during a large group, and next to a certain peer. So what environmental structure and supports are needed to reduce it? Well, we could not make her sit next to a non-preferred peer. We could teach her in a small group if a large group is a problem for her. We could remind her she can take breaks, because if she's aggressing during class time, she's telling us, I don't know how else to get out of this, potentially. So fine, let's give her another way to get out of it. Remind her she can take a break. We can also teach conflict mediation with peers. If she's aggressing towards peers but not adults, then maybe she needs help interacting with peers. So all of these examples are based on what we've noticed about the behavior in all the sections above. So for a lot of my students where maybe they're in a intensive instruction class, maybe they have limited communication, a lot of the environmental supports here are going to be things like make sure their first then board is available, right? Like make sure all their visuals are around, make sure their speech generating device is nearby at all times, if that's applicable. It could be things like where you seat them. The student who's taking a lot of breaks every day because they're learning how, maybe that student can be seated next to the door so they don't disturb the whole class as they come in and out with a paraeducator. Anything like that, anything where you're going to set up your classroom and you're going to plan interactions with this student in such a way that the antecedents are not so problematic for that student. Okay, it's an important section, but I think that's enough about that. Okay, so then functional factors. Team believes the behavior occurs because it's broken down to what is the student accessing with this behavior and what is the student avoiding with this behavior. You can check either one, you can check both. It depends. So given the antecedents and the consequences of the behaviors, what patterns are you noticing? Does it look like, oh, this behavior gets this kiddo access to adult attention, or this behavior results in the student maybe escaping a task, whatever it is that you've noticed looking at your antecedents and your consequences for the behaviors that have happened so far. In this example, we're checking avoid because it looks like the student is trying to get out of an unwanted activity and she's trying to get away from a peer, potentially. Oh, there's 2 other checkboxes. I don't know why that got, oh, I see what happened. Okay, so we checked avoid for Sarah, and this is the rationale. We have 2 other checkboxes under function. Automatic reinforcement, that means the behavior is not for attention or escape or tangibles. The behavior is actually reinforcing in itself. So automatically reinforcing behaviors, again, they're not doing it to get your attention or to get out of work. they're just doing it because it's fun to do it. So things like self-stimulatory behaviors, the hand flapping, maybe the vocal stems, sometimes some self-injury, sometimes head banging can even be automatically reinforcing. So that's what that means. It means there's no external behavior. We've looked at the antecedents and the consequences. We're not seeing any pattern. This behavior happens whether the kid's alone or in a group. It happens whether they're in academic time or recess. It happens whether they have food in front of them or not, right? So if you see no pattern emerging, it's an indication that this behavior might just be a lot of fun for this kid. So that's when you check automatic. Other, I have not checked other. I find the other three to pretty much encompass all the functions of behaviors. But if you find other useful and you run into a situation where you don't find the other three really apply, then other is there. You would just explain why you check that and what that means. Okay, so now that we know what they're doing, and we think we know why they're doing it. That's this section. I'm losing my little arrow. Here we go. This is why they're doing it. So this next section now is, well, what should they do instead? What should they do instead of the problem behavior that you listed at the tip top? Instead of this, right, what do we want the student to do that will get them access to this? So that's what functionally equivalent means. Replacement behavior means what behavior are you replacing the target behavior with? And functionally equivalent means it's got to meet the same need. So we said she was doing these behaviors for the sake of avoid. We checked avoid. We said she's doing these behaviors to get out of a task and to get away from a peer. So this section is, well, how is she supposed to get away from a task and away from a peer? So given what you wrote in functional factors, describe how they should meet that need appropriately. For our example here, she should get out of non-preferred tasks by asking for a break or asking to take a walk, right? I see people run into trouble in this section because they'll say something like, the student is hitting the peer, the function is to get away from the peer, and then their replacement behavior will say something like, well, she should learn to like the peer, or she should learn to just deal with it and suck it up and be by that peer. That doesn't get the kid this. So it might be a replacement behavior, but it's not a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. You need to ensure that the behavior that you list here still equals this conclusion for the student. So she's trying to get out of work. How's she going to get out of work? I can't say she should do her work because that wouldn't get her out of work. So this is the most, where I see people run into the most trouble on this form. So just make sure whatever behavior you have here, it meets the need that you listed here. Now, sometimes it's not possible. And then you can just list a replacement behavior. It's not always going to be possible to have a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. For example, my student who liked to pull down ladies' shirts because he thought bras were fascinating. Well, there's no appropriate way to look at bras at school, buddy. So we had to just teach him replacement behaviors. They weren't necessarily functionally equivalent. But in the case of a kid's trying to get out of work, yeah, there's an appropriate way to do that. You can ask me for a break or a different task. In the case of they're trying to access preferred tangibles, like a student is acting out because you denied access to iPad, for example. Yeah, there's an appropriate way they can get access to iPad at school. So for most behaviors we run into, there is going to be a FERB, a functionally equivalent replacement behavior. But sometimes it's just going to be a replacement behavior, and that's okay. So here she's going to ask for a break. What about getting away from the peer? Because we said that was part of the maintaining factors too. Well, she can ask to move her seat. She can use conflict mediation strategies, because remember, we listed in her antecedents that we're going to teach her some conflict mediation strategies. So she could use those. That would get her away from the peer, right? If she says, I'm going to take some space from you right now, Tabitha, or whatever the kid's name is, that would be an appropriate way to get away from her without hitting her over the head with furniture. Maybe she asked the teacher to intervene. All of those things result in she's still getting away from the thing she's trying to get away from. We're not going to teach kids to not have needs. So we're going to teach them appropriate ways to meet the need. Now, in the case of they're trying to get out of tasks and we write a plan that says, well, okay, they're going to ask for break. The next question I usually get is, well, so it's okay then for them to just ask for a break all day and never do any task? No, of course not. But first I want them to have this behavior in their repertoire. I want them to have this in their toolbox, that they know I can ask for a break if I need to ask for a break. I don't need to engage in aggression or property destruction. And once they know that, and the unwanted behavior drops to 0, and they're asking for a break a lot of the time, then we can go from there. Then we can change the criterion. We can write a new plan from there. Now the problem behavior isn't aggression. Now the problem behavior is work avoidance or task avoidance. And we can talk about how to intervene from there. But you can't skip the step of, first they have to know how to meet the need appropriately. Okay, bit of a tangent, I apologize. Let's move on. This is asking us, how are you going to teach the student to do the thing that you wrote in the verb? So if the verb is, well, Sarah shouldn't throw chairs to get out of work, Sarah should ask for a break to get out of work. Cool, how are you going to teach Sarah to ask for a break? So that, I mean, teachers, you're experts at this. That can look any way you want. How are you going to teach this skill? The same way you teach any skill, right? It's probably some combination of modeling, prompting, reinforcement, probably practicing when Sarah is calm instead of waiting for her to be upset and then coming in and saying, hey, try this new thing of asking for a break. Probably you want to teach it at the right time. Maybe it's going to be worked on in a resource class or in a counselor's office or something like that. So I'll let you guys steer this section because it's just teaching, and you guys are teachers. List reinforcement procedures needed for establishing, maintaining, and generalizing. So it's asking us for 3 separate things. How are we going to reinforce while we're establishing the replacement behavior? That's going to have to be a pretty dense schedule of reinforcement. If it's a brand new behavior that this student doesn't have any learning history with, we're introducing a new skill, probably we have to reinforce a lot while we're establishing it. But then as we're maintaining and generalizing, we could probably lessen the reinforcement. So think about something like, think about like potty training, for example. You ever potty trained a child? The first time they use the toilet, you throw a party and it's a big deal. But then the more they do it, you don't continue to reinforce at that level. You don't reinforce at all anymore after a point. So that's what this is. It's establishing means it's new, and we want it to be really solid in the repertoire. So we need this behavior to work every time. Maintaining and generalizing is more like we're fading out reinforcement now because they've got it down. So is there anything else I need to tell you about that? Our example here, while we're establishing, we're going to reinforce Sarah's behavior every time it happens. Remember, we reinforce behaviors, not people. I almost slipped there. We're going to reinforce her asking for a break. Whenever she does it, she gets a break. And then as she gets better at it, here, once the replacement behaviors are firmly in her repertoire, so she doesn't need reminders, she's doing them independently, and she's not engaging in aggression. So here, now she's consistently meeting her need by engaging in the verb and not engaging in the problem behavior. That's terrific. At that point, we can start to back off with the reinforcers. Generalizing is talking about, generalization across time is maintenance. So we've already covered that. So how about generalizing across adults? Does she ask for a break from the lunchroom staff? Does she ask for a break from the resource teacher? Right? We want to make sure it's not just the teacher she spends the most time with. Also generalize across settings. What about in prep class? What about if it's a younger kiddo? What about yard duty when they're at recess? So that's what generalization means. Okay, how do we select the reinforcer? So whatever you listed here, so we said here the reinforcer is we're going to do what she asked for if she asks appropriately. So if she asks for a break, the reinforcer is you get a break. It doesn't have to be a sticker on a chart or a goldfish or an M&M or all these things that people associate with behavior analysis. It can be as simple as you asked for something nicely, you get it. So how did you choose that as the reinforcer? Well, that's typically how you reinforce communication, right? You make the communication work for the person. You can also pair it with praise. You could also list something like, every week that she doesn't engage in aggression, we're going to have a pizza party. I mean, if you want to do other stuff to beef it up, that's absolutely fine. But the most important thing is that when the child engages in the verb, when the student engages in the verb, some of our students are adults, aren't they? When the student engages in the verb, that behavior gets reinforced by that behavior works for them. So let's see, what do I have here? It should be that it meets the same function. So meaning the function that this BIP is working on is escape and avoidance. So the behavior is trying to, when Sarah engages in the behavior, what she's seeking is escape. So when she does the correct behavior, I'm going to give her escape. So sometimes it can literally be whatever the function was. If it was attention, well, let's say Sarah's hitting me to get my attention. Well, now I'm going to teach her to call my name instead. And now this section is saying, so now when she calls your name, what are you going to do for her? I'm going to give her attention. I'm going to give her exactly the thing I said in the function. Maybe I'm also going to have her on a token economy. Like all of that's fine too. And you could also list that under reinforcers. But the main thing is that the main point of this section is, how are you going to make sure that when the student engages in the verb, that it works for that student? Okay, this next section is, so everything up till this point was proactive. It was all antecedent things. It's all, what are we going to put in place immediately moving forward, as opposed to what are we going to do when she engages in aggression? So everything has been the proactive side. Now we're going to talk about the reactive side. Now we're going to talk about what are we going to do when she engages in aggression? Given all these other things that we put in place, we must also be prepared for the possibility that the plan doesn't work right away, even if our antecedent strategies are so dense and meet all her needs. That's ideal. Maybe the behavior never happens again because we teach her to ask for a break and she does that and we live happily ever after. But usually it doesn't work that quickly. And so we have to also plan for, what are we going to do when she engages in aggression in the meantime? While the aggression is decreasing, when it occurs at all, what are we going to do? So this form breaks it into early escalation behaviors, and then during problem behavior, and then while de-escalating, and then post. So we have four categories of behavior to talk about. The left side is student behavior, and the staff side is staff behavior. So early escalation, maybe you've noticed precursor behaviors. Maybe before she hits, she starts pacing, or maybe there's a vocal sound. Maybe there's a sound and you know, when I hear that sound, my student's escalating. So maybe it's just some increase in a behavior that you've noticed. Or maybe it's a decrease. Maybe they're usually chatty, but on days when they're real quiet, that means we're probably gonna have a problem behavior occur. So example, Sarah glares at the peer next to her. She fidgets with items in her desk. She audibly sighs, and she starts eyeing a nearby stool because that's a precursor for, I'm going to hit you with this stool. So what do we do at that point? How are we going to intervene at this point early and appropriately in order to prevent the student from escalating, prevent the behavior from escalating? So in our example, as soon as we hear her sighing and we see her looking around the room and getting fidgety, the staff are going to say, hey, Sarah, would you like to take a walk right now? You look like you might need to take a walk. Let's go do that. Okay. And then hopefully she says yes. And we never get to the bit where she throws stools around, hopefully. Maybe we also move the furniture out of reach at that point. Maybe we just give her a job that takes her out of the room. If you can tell she needs a break, but you can also kind of gauge that if I just tell her, hey, Sarah, go take a break, what if she says no? Then we're stuck. Then it's a power struggle. So instead of telling her to take a break or asking her to do that, you could say something like, would you like to go take this textbook to the resource room? This is good too if the student is embarrassed, if they don't like that, well, how come I'm the only one that the teacher sometimes says that to? No one else is asked to take a break. I'm the only one that sometimes essentially gets kicked out of the classroom. So you might phrase it in a more creative way. Okay, now we're on to student behaviors. Well, I normally just copy and paste. I've already told you about the behavior, right? In the beginning of the form, it's aggression and it looks like this. So I just paste it in there. Sometimes I'll think of something else here like, oh, right. And sometimes there's also kicking, and then that will prompt me to go back up and add it into the description at the top. What are we gonna do during the problem behavior? So while she's hitting people with stools or while she has a peer in a headlock, what are we gonna do? So the goal here is mainly about keeping everyone safe. But I would say a secondary goal is to try to block the behaviors from being reinforced as much as possible. If you have to reinforce those behaviors to keep people safe, do it. For example, this is a very extreme example. Hopefully you never run into this, but we've worked with students who, for whatever reason, they found a restraint very reinforcing. And so they would act out as much as they needed to end up in a restraint. And we knew as we went to attach, this is going to reinforce it. Oh, well, you know, your other option is to have the student hurt himself or hurt somebody else, which we can't do. So we'll work on the behavior plan on how to teach the student the proper way to get that sensation. What did he like about the reinforcement? He probably liked the body contact, the squeezes. So how can we teach him to get that appropriately? We'll teach that, but in this moment when safety is an issue, you got to do what you got to do. So I want you to put safety over blocking reinforcers. But if you can do both, all the better. So in this case, we're going to move all the furniture away from her. We're going to evacuate the students. We're going to get additional backup staff members in the room. We need at least 2 staff people in the room at all times with Sarah while everyone else is out. Assist as needed. Assist the peer to get out of any hold per district approved crisis management, etc. So whatever you're going to do when the behaviors are in full swing. Now the student is de-escalating. So I take this to mean everyone's safe again, but it's still touch and go. We're not at the point where we can just jump back into class and reset. There's still some stuff under the surface, but at the moment we're all safe. So what does that look like? So Sarah stops yelling. Sometimes she might cry. She might apologize. She might ask us not to call her parents. She might start picking up furniture. Students sometimes at this point, maybe they could fall asleep. That might be post-incident. But how do you know we're calming back down? What does that look like? And then on our staff response side, how are we going to reestablish communication? How are we going to foster this downward de-escalation trend? Basically, how are we going to reinforce that, yes, you're calming down and avoid re-triggering the behavior and jumping back up a level? So we're going to encourage her at this point to use any calming strategies available to her. And if we knew what they were here, you'd list them. Remind her she can take deep breaths. Remind her she can, whatever it might be that the student was taught. I've kept this pretty vague, but you can be more specific. Offer to help her clean the room. Don't take over and do it for her, but if you see her start to pick up chairs, maybe you pick up 1 chair. The point is, we're trying to keep her going in that direction. Okay, and then the last section in this block is student behaviors during post-incident. So after the incident's over. So now how do you know we're really done and it's no longer touch and go and there's no longer some potential for a relapse of the behavior? So what does that look like behaviorally? So here, Sarah will say she's feeling better. She wants to go back to class. Maybe the student walks over to their visual schedule and brings you an icon like, hey, we're gonna go join my group now. So whatever the indication is that it's over and we're gonna basically reset. So what do the staff do when Sarah does this? So Sarah says, I'm feeling better. I want to go back to class. Assuming we were able to keep her in school. This is a separate issue of if you hurt someone, you might be sent home. Let's assume it didn't get that extreme and she's able to go back to class. So what do we do? Well, it's, again, if safe to do so, allow her to stay at school. It might not be safe. We might not be allowing her. Give her the choice to work in the library or the resource classroom. Maybe if it's not safe to have her back in her own classroom with her peers. Remind her you can always try again. Maybe you're completing a worksheet with Sarah as directed by the school counselor. There are some great examples of, let's do this guided with a facilitator, so with a teacher or a para helping her, where you can talk about what happened, what made you upset, what did you do when you're upset, and what could you do differently next time. So there's some debriefing worksheets with that kind of a template. So maybe you're doing that at that time. And then resume all the applicable environmental structure and support strategies listed above. So environmental structure and supports, what were those? Those were these things. She gets a choice of seating again. We're gonna give her reminders she can take a break. We're going to practice social skills. So you're basically resetting and starting over. And now we're doing the proactive strategies again. The reactive strategies are done. We're back to proactive. The last little bit, if you have a behavior plan, you must have a behavior goal. So we check the box, and what number goal is it? That's all you have to do is give the number. You don't have to retype out the goal. The behavior goal is going to talk about the replacement behavior. So you will probably be writing a goal in this case about, where's our verb? Here. So Sarah's going to get out of non-preferred tasks by asking for a break. So the baseline of the goal would be, how often does she currently do that? Does she ever ask for a break? Probably not. We haven't taught her yet that she has that choice. So the baseline might be, she does this 0. And in fact, she gets out of work by engaging in aggression X number of times, twice per year, or whatever percentage, or however you're measuring that. So the baseline might be 0. It might be, maybe she asks for a break sometimes, but it's inconsistent. And again, we're seeing aggression this frequently. And then the goal could be, well, we want her to ask for a break appropriately instead of engage in aggression 100% of the opportunities. So basically, we want to take aggression down to 0. So that's generally how the goals are phrased for behavior goals. You can also do just a straight up reduction goal. The baseline is 2 times per year she hurts somebody. The goal is 0 times per year. But also, we do also like to have some kind of tracking of the verb. How do we know if this person's engaging in the verb? Because if they're not engaging in the verb, the behavior plan isn't really working. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Please reach out to your program specialist, your behavior specialist, your school psychologist if you have further questions about behavior plans. And thank you very much.